An old man stepped into the courtroom. His faded uniform spoke of a war long forgotten. Muffled giggles echoed. The judge sneered. But why did he stay silent? A small slip of paper bearing a single name fluttered down. The entire room fell into hushed awe. Who was he? What lay behind that stillness? A silence powerful enough to stir every heart. This is the journey of Sergeant Jacob Holt, proof that true heroes need no medals to shine. If you cherish stories of courage and sacrifice, subscribe to Veteran Best Stories, where we bring these moments back to life and ensure their names echo forever. Are you ready to uncover the secret behind that uniform? Let's begin. Morning mist still clung to the window pane when Jacob Holt slowly swept the soft cloth across the mirror. It revealed the reflection of a man seasoned by life's trials. The modest suburban apartment looked almost bare. An old wooden bed, a small table by the window, a neat stack of books. Amidst it all, his worn uniform lay folded in a cedar wood box, like a treasured relic. The faint glow of the desk lamp caught on the tarnished silver badges. Every crease in the fabric whispered of days when he and his comrades trudged through rain of bombs and bullets. Jacob opened the box with deliberate care. His heart stirred. He lifted each badge, each fold, as though touching his own past. His breath came in a soft rasp. His pulse quickened at memories of the first time he donned this uniform, the scorching sun over desert sands, dust stretching to the horizon, alarms screaming through the black night. Never had he imagined he would come to love that faded fabric so much, both shield and steadfast armchair for his aging soul. On the table lay the jury summons, thin yet weighted with responsibility. Jacob had stared at it countless times, those solemn printed lines, the seal bearing the scales of justice, an invitation one could not refuse. He neither sought notoriety nor bragging rights, yet he knew the duty of a citizen as keenly as the oath of a soldier sworn to defend his country. He bowed his head over the box, whispering to himself, "Today I do not fight for freedom. Today I fight for justice." Slipping into the uniform, Jacob closed his eyes and drew a deep breath. The creased cloth against his skin carried the scent of cedar and decades of memory. Each badge told a story. The first pinned on graduation day, the anti-aircraft badge earned guarding the skies, the last caked with the dust of his final battle. Now faded, tarnished, they still glittered in Jacob's eyes. He picked up the leather satchel holding his mementos, a vial of wild grass seeds found in a minefield, a lighter engraved with his wife's name, a hastily penned letter from his grandson. "You are my hero." Jacob nodded. A faint smile broke through the thin haze of steam from his tea. He was not a man of fanfare. The battlefield had taught him the power of silence. At times, silence echoes farther than gunfire. The early bus arrived as if waiting for him. Jacob slung the satchel over his shoulder and stepped out into dawn's gentle conquest of darkness. All was still, only birds greeting the morning and wheels humming on asphalt. Row upon row of weathered, red-tiled roofs, windows ajar to welcome the sun. With each step, Jacob felt the town's pulse. Bird song, the fragrance of jasmine, the creak of wooden fences. On the bus, he chose the rear seat, the perfect vantage to observe without drawing attention. Passengers glanced at his uniform. Some offered grateful smiles. Others shook their heads, deeming him outdated. Jacob paid no mind. To him, the uniform was not for show. It was the imprint of his past, gratitude to fallen comrades, and hope for a fairer future. Mid-route, the bus sped through a bustling intersection. Horns blended with morning newspaper calls, each sound a reminder that life flows on, even as the world beyond shifts. Jacob recalled the battle on the northern border. At night, he and his comrades huddled behind an earthen berm, the staccato of shell fire sounding as though his heart would shatter. When the guns fell silent, he gazed at the star-studded sky, vowing that if he lived to see another dawn, he would live worthy of that gift. The bus stopped before the county courthouse, an austere concrete building with heavy iron gates and broad marble steps. The plaza seemed hushed. 2 officers stood at attention. A flag fluttered in the breeze. Jacob rose, landed on his feet with the steady grace of years, though his back was slightly bent and silver streaked his hair. He joined the queue, produced his summons at the security gate. Once cleared, he entered the high-ceilinged corridor bathed in fluorescent light. Wood-paneled walls lent warmth, flanked by benches for awaiting attendees. Footsteps clicked on the polished stone floor in even rhythm. He paused before the portraits of past judges, stern faces carved in stone, commanding respect. Jacob bowed his head in silent homage, as if observing a sacred ritual. When the courtroom doors opened, all eyes turned to him. Spectators, lawyers, court staff, each registering surprise at the sight of an old man in uniform. Jacob stepped in, offered a respectful bow, then took his seat among the gallery. Without a word, his solemn nod spoke volumes. His reverence for justice, the very cause he once defended with arms. Ahead, the jury box sat empty. Nameplates ready. A chair scraped. The double doors closed, and a warm, resonant voice intoned. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, counsel for the prosecution, counsel for the defense." Jacob closed his eyes, absorbing each greeting as if engraving the day's significance into his heart. He was not the protagonist here, but he was an indispensable part of the grand tableau of justice. Looking around, Jacob's mind wandered to old comrades, their familiar faces, the pat on the shoulder, tears shed when a brother never returned. Today, he carried their memories here, convinced that justice, like freedom, must be upheld. Though unarmed, he could still fan the flame of communal conscience, reminding every citizen that each voice matters. As proceedings began, Jacob sat tall, gaze forward, his spirit at peace. He imagined standing in a trench, listening for orders. The jury, those who would listen, deliberate, and decide, were like his old squad, each bearing the weight of responsibility. Jacob smiled inwardly. Today, he did not fight alone, and in that solemn chamber, his faded uniform shone anew. Past and present converged to deliver a profound message. In life, each of us can champion our ideals, even if those ideals no longer bear arms. For Jacob Holt, appearing in court was not merely civic duty. It was a continuation of his oath, to defend justice, honor the right, and remember all who fell for that cause. The murmur of conversation, the echo of footsteps, the trill of ringing phones blended into a chaotic symphony just outside the city courthouse waiting room. Jacob Holt eased himself into the doorway. His faded uniform made the security guard hesitate for a beat. In that instant, it was not the gleam of badges, but his confident silence that seemed to still the air. Jacob did not step inside right away. He stood there, shoulders weighed down by time's imprint, quietly surveying the hurried lives around him. When he finally entered the waiting room, Jacob kept his back perfectly straight. The army cap in his hand became a constant companion. He placed it on his knee each time he bowed his head to inspect the summons. The space buzzed like a crowded market. Someone sipping steaming coffee, another bent over a phone, couples whispering about everyday matters. Every gesture on display proclaimed the hustle of modern life, while he, a soldier who had known both silence and gunfire, stood quietly at its edge, letting the scene unfold before him. Eyes turned toward Jacob, but he paid no mind. Some leaned in, curious about the silver badge on his chest. Others scoffed silently. An anachronism in a new world. His calm stillness acted like a strange magnet, drawing glances from every corner of the room. Each person carried their own thoughts, their own footsteps, but when they faced Jacob, they all fell silent. A young woman in business attire stood by the window, earbuds in place. Her gaze flickered to him. She leaned close to a colleague. "Do you think he's in the wrong place?" The question fell like raindrops on a tin roof. Jacob only offered a small, knowing smile, one accustomed to baseless suspicion. He was not offended. Rather, his ease only fueled their curiosity. Beside him, a middle-aged man in a leather jacket sneered under his breath. "He probably thinks this is some war drama." His gaze brimmed with contempt, as if Jacob were performing for their benefit. But Jacob had seen plenty of such eyes, on fields of battle and in post-war towns, where he fought to reclaim a normal life. Such scorn was but a small toll. It could not stir his heart. Jacob moved to a bench against the bare wall, sat down, placed his cap on his knee. Around him, the din continued, wheels rolling on marble, hurried footsteps, fragments of laughter and chatter, each accentuating the melody of his own silence. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, let the noise wash over him like waves against a ship's hull, then ebb away. Memories surged, ruined battlefields after each skirmish, screams in the night, the acrid scent of smoke mingled with the salt of blood and tears. He recalled his comrade's first glimpse of the moon after landing, hands gripping rifles, eyes alight with hope. Those images were etched into Jacob's soul, an epic of survival and faith in tomorrow. Suddenly, the announcement called his name, slicing through his thoughts. Jacob rose, gathered his cap and summons, approached the reception desk. The clerk looked up, startled by the worn shoulders and faded patches of his uniform. Jacob tapped the cloth once, threaded his way through the crowd, and moved steadily toward the closed doors where the trial awaited. The hallway to the courtroom felt quieter. Fluorescent lights bounced off dark wood paneling. Jacob's footsteps on the marble floor sounded soft but steady, like a heartbeat that had endured much. He glanced at the judge's portraits lining the walls, stern faces, eyes that seemed to watch every passerby. Jacob paused, bowed his head in respectful greeting to the space, and to the justice it embodied. As the courtroom doors swung open, a shaft of white light spilled into the corridor. Jacob stepped inside. All eyes fell on him once more. No one spoke. Only silence followed his path. He took the jury gallery seat, placed his cap on his knee. In that hush, the weight of the moment pressed in, the convergence of a storied past and the solemn duties of the present. The presiding judge's warm voice called out, "Good morning, members of the jury, counsel for the prosecution, counsel for the defense." Jacob lifted his eyes to meet the court, then swept his gaze across the room. He was not the central figure of the case before them, yet his presence stirred the sense that justice is more than an abstract ideal. It is the same calling that once drove him to bear arms, now compelling him to sit and listen, ensuring fairness for others. As the judge explained the summons, Jacob turned slightly, watched the jurors whisper among themselves, their eyes lingering on his badge. He offered a quiet nod of thanks, grateful that they recognized the value of one who once fought for his nation. The harsh days of hardship had forged in Jacob an unshakable resolve. Today, he maintained faith that, however slowly, justice would find its rightful course. The courtroom's atmosphere grew solemn, the rustle of files opening, the scratch of pens on paper. Jacob sat tall, hands clasped around his cap, eyes brightening at each cited statute. Every word carried weight, not just ink on a page, but hope for those seeking justice, for families yearning for fairness. When the trial officially began, Jacob maintained his focus. He remembered the day he received the summons, the quiet moments in his small apartment, gazing at his worn uniform and telling himself, fighting isn't always about bearing arms. Today, he fought through his presence. He fought by reminding us that every citizen, no matter their circumstances, bears the responsibility to uphold justice. That faded uniform, aged by countless years, still shone in Jacob's heart like an undying torch, its light guiding the path of righteousness and conscience. When his name echoed over the loudspeaker, Jacob Holt furrowed his brow. He inhaled deeply before stepping through the courtroom door. His straight posture, chest slightly thrust forward, was not arrogance, but the reflex of a man who had spent half his life in uniform. Every step across the battlefield, every confrontation with the enemy, demanded unwavering stance, indomitable will. The heavy door closed behind him. In that moment, the corridor's chaos, the clatter of the iron door, the rush of footsteps, seemed to drain away, yielding to an oppressive stillness within the crowded room. Overhead lights glinted on the dark wood-paneled walls. A long beam traced the marble floor. The waxy scent of framed portraits, the crisp odor of fresh legal files, mingled with the weighty aroma of printing ink. And Jacob was reminded of mornings awaiting deployment orders, when dew clung to rifles and damp earth clung to boots. He was familiar with those tension signals. Every sound, every scent heralded a new mission, a battle about to begin. Today, his battle was silence amid a crowd, steadfast resolve before probing stares and endless whispers. He strode across the marble. Each footfall echoed like a drumbeat demanding attention. Every eye in the room turned to him, from the tense young faces in the jury box craning to see, to the middle-aged and elderly spectators gingerly lowering their coffee cups, careful not to spill the last drop of milk. No one pushed forward. No one spoke above a whisper. Yet the collective gaze fixed on Jacob condensed the air in an instant. He approached the lectern at the front of the courtroom, his eyes fixed on the space ahead, the jury bench, the judge's elevated seat, the lawyers, defendant, and witnesses awaiting proceedings. The wrinkles at the corners of his eyes hinted at hardship past. His silver hair against the faded uniform emphasized time's imprint. In that moment, Jacob was neither stranger nor central character in the case. He was a living emblem of the past persisting in the present, a figure none could ignore. As he laid his hand on the lectern's edge, Judge Richard Hayes's sly smile flickered to life. From his bench, the judge lifted his coffee cup, his eyes mocking yet curious. "You're not auditioning for some military parade, are you?" he quipped, his voice carrying playful sarcasm. Laughter rippled through the rows like waves, indifferent to who might be swept away. Jacob neither nodded nor smiled. He held his ground, his gaze steely, hardened by countless brutal campaigns, unmoved by jest. The laughter subsided when the court clerk leaned forward, whispered something to the judge. Judge Hayes frowned, glanced down at the small slip of paper in his hand, then nodded. The rustle of paper sounded almost comical, but enough to seize attention. Pens paused mid-scribe, brows knitted as everyone noted an inescapable detail. The solemn text on the paper confirmed the name Jacob Holt, the very man standing before them. The room seemed to hold its breath. Fluorescent lights flickered, the ceiling fan turned with a soft whir. Jacob sensed a subtle shift in the air, from excitement and curiosity to admiration and respect. He barely registered the soft crackle of the speaker, all faded behind the gravity of that instant. He took another step, leaned fully on the lectern, placed the summons on the plexiglass surface, light reflecting off it onto his weathered face. Eyes rose to meet him. The young juror fumbled with a chair. A woman in the gallery crossed her arms as if to steady herself against astonishment. Through it all, the only constant sound was the scratch of pen on paper, letters slowly tracing history in real time. Jacob needed no words. His presence spoke volumes. In that moment, memories of distant days surged forward. He recalled mornings donning a crisp uniform, gripping a rifle, bracing for battle. He remembered the deafening blasts of shells, the acrid tang of gunpowder, the chill of night when sweat mingled with fear and resolve. He remembered fallen comrades, midnight watches in shattered trenches, awaiting orders to move on, all forging his calm, unwavering courage. But today, the battlefield lay far behind. His struggle was no longer guns and explosions, but silence in a hall of justice. He lifted his eyes to the presiding judge. His expression remained solemn. Jacob's silence was no mere pause. It was a bridge between glorious past and solemn present. He did not just wear medals of valor, he bore the responsibility of citizenship in his heart. No one could pinpoint exactly what transformed the atmosphere, yet each person in the room felt the invisible force. It was not rallying cries or grand oratory, but the image of one who had endured enough to need no explanation, a living testament that justice is upheld not only by words, but by steadfast presence. All eyes sought answers in Jacob's gaze. Could justice still hold its ancient dignity? Could faith in right prevail against time and life's trials? Silence enveloped them so deeply that every breath, every heartbeat seemed to resonate. Wooden chairs creaked. Leather shoes whispered on marble, time's footsteps echoing through generations. Jacob inhaled softly, placed his hand upon the lectern, then closed his eyes for a brief heartbeat. Light streaming from a distant window bathed his faded uniform in a faint halo. And in that glow, the courtroom itself began to change. Judge Richard Hayes paused mid-sip of his ice-cold coffee, his gaze locked onto the petit jury summons before him. Suddenly, the courtroom felt stifling. The laughter and chatter that had filled the air fell silent. Every footstep, every rustle of pages ceased. All attention focused on the moment he reread the name printed in bold. Jacob Holt. He folded the paper slowly, his hand trembled ever so slightly, shock and disbelief surging within him. No one dared speak as Hayes set his coffee cup on the table with a soft click. He rose deliberately, smoothing his impeccable black robe, the badge on his chest gleaming against the solemn court uniform. Then, with a subtle yet commanding motion, he saluted Jacob as any officer would, back straight, fingers touching the brim of his cap, eyes unwavering. That silent salute resonated throughout the room. Every gaze turned to the elderly man standing motionless in their midst. In that instant, the room seemed to hold its breath. The smirks vanished, the whispers ceased as though hypnotized. From the jury box to the gallery, all eyes were fixed on this unexpected guest, an old man in a faded uniform. Yet Jacob Holt was no ordinary face. He was a living legend, a name that once struck fear into enemies and inspired his comrades. His expression remained stoic, as if staring into the void. But in those deep-set eyes lay countless memories. The wrinkles at the corners of his eyes deepened as he squinted, recalling a fateful moment. His faded military coat draped his gaunt frame. Every crease and fray told tales of brutal campaigns across blazing deserts, through humid jungles, beside villages reduced to rubble. Few had known the story behind those dulled silver insignias. Years earlier, on a distant battlefield where shells screamed without pause, Jacob had charged alone into enemy lines to rescue 3 severely wounded comrades. He'd fallen to the ground, blood soaking his uniform, yet he refused to drop his weapon until he ensured their safety. That night, under a pale moon, he bound his wounds with ragged cloth and bandages, then plunged back into danger to lead them to the stronghold. He sought neither praise nor recognition. After the press covered the massacre at Sandfork, Jacob quietly withdrew to a secluded civilian settlement, vanishing from the media's gaze. Some papers reported him killed in action. Others speculated he lived in rural obscurity. All were mere rumors. Jacob never corrected them. He considered glory ephemeral. War had taught him the power of silence. Now, standing before Judge Hayes and 100 curious eyes, Jacob bears upon his shoulders a legendary past few truly understand. Every earlier jeer, every sneer about an outdated old man, eager for acclaim, has transformed into profound, silent respect. The space around him feels carved into an invisible circle, with Jacob at its center. In his silvered uniform, resolute spirit unbowed, his chest never once stained by blood. Presiding Judge Hayes, a true bishop of justice, inclines his head and nods gently. In that gesture, he acknowledges that not every uniformed soldier is superficial. His gaze meets Jacob's with calm admiration. Words cannot capture this shift, only the unspoken recognition. Today, this elder juror is not merely a citizen, but an emblem of courage and sacrifice. In the gallery, the young, those who still recall the Sandfork battle, whisper among themselves, their eyes shining with awe. The middle-aged, having heard the rumors, wipe their eyes as if doubting that the legend still lives. In mere seconds, mockery has given way to reverence, the mood transformed utterly. Jacob Holt does not smile. He simply bows his head in silent salute to Judge Hayes, a wordless gesture laden with duty and pride. The old cap in his hand sways gently, like a tolling bell in the hush. His tall frame before the Hall of Justice stands testament that, though years may pass, loyalty, honor, and sacrifice remain immortal. He strides to the juror's seat, each step symbolic, each footfall echoing on the marble floor, carrying memories of muddy roads and the glory of battle smoke. Jacob sits, placing his hat in his lap, eyes fixed resolutely on the bench, as though waiting to deliver his opening statement. Yet, in this moment, the courtroom is not just a venue for adjudication, but a crossroads of heroic past and solemn present. All eyes rest on Jacob Holt, who has emerged from the shadows of distant wars to appear here today. They recognize that beyond the faded uniform stands not just an old soldier, but a living legend, a living proof that courage and service endure in any circumstance. And as Jacob settles into his seat, no words are spoken. Only the collective heartbeat of justice pulses in the silence. In that hush, the legend is rekindled, and none dare mock him again. Judge Richard Hayes lowered his gaze to the paper bearing the name Jacob Holt. For a brief moment, astonishment flickered across his eyes before swiftly giving way to reverence. The coffee cup on the bench was set down so softly it made no sound, as though the entire courtroom held its breath. He read the bold type once more. Each letter seemed laden with meaning. Jacob Holt. The earlier titters fell silent, replaced by a hush of bewilderment and respect that rippled through the chamber. Without another second's hesitation, Judge Hayes rose from the elevated bench. He straightened his robe with a slow, solemn gesture. Sunlight streamed through the window, grazing the edge of his gown and casting a subtle beam of light directly onto the distinguished visitor. Then, no longer merely presiding judge, but an old comrade, he delivered a military salute to Jacob, back rigid, hand to cap brim, eyes locked on the seasoned officer before him. That silent salute carried the weight of countless sacrifices. In that instant, every sound vanished. The hum of the air conditioner, the rustle of case files, the whispers of jurors, all faded into absolute silence. Only remained the figure of an elderly man, shoulders slightly stooped, yet gaze bright, clad in a silver-faded uniform. Beside him, the judge, moments ago joking about a parade, stood quietly acknowledging one truth. Jacob Holt was no stranger. He was a living legend. Before Sergeant Holt could respond, every eye in the room was upon him. The young faces in the front row, including Ethan, a constitutional law student who'd come merely to complete an assignment, lifted in awe and trepidation. Ethan's threadbare hoodie and slack headphones gave no clue to the storm within. He fumbled to stow his phone as the moment outstripped anything he'd ever seen. He had laughed off the judge's earlier quip about a march, yet now, witnessing this military courtesy firsthand, his heart pounded with newfound intensity. No words were spoken. That unspoken respect sprang from Jacob's heroic past. A lone rescue under hailstorm fire, dragging 3 gravely wounded comrades back to the stronghold's warm blankets, despite his own severe injury, binding his wounds by moonlight before returning to danger. Few knew that tale, for when the press covered the Sand Fork campaign, they wrote only of a bitter clash and casualty lists, never mentioning the silent hero who risked all for his unit. Jacob chose silence, letting his name fade, until today. Returning to the bench, Judge Hayes spoke in a warm, resonant voice. "Sergeant Holt, welcome home." Simple words, unembellished, yet they unleashed a surge of emotion throughout the courtroom. Every smirk, every whisper about this out-of-time veteran vanished in that moment. From the jury box to the gallery, faces glowed with respect. No one dared break the silence. Only Ethan drew a quick, shaky breath, feeling his heart race more fiercely than ever. Jacob did not rush to reply. He inclined his head, returning the salute with measured grace. The gesture, though small, reminded every observer. Harrison Holt had never forgotten the soldier's code, even as his uniform faded and time etched its mark. After a heartbeat, no applause arose, only the soft sound of hands brushing chair arms, brief yet sincere. During the recess, phones emerged, Headlines scrolled, images shared at speed, but Ethan remained seated, eyes fixed on Jacob Holt. He rose, crossed the aisle, and approached the veteran, not with words, but with a respectful nod. Jacob looked up, surprised, then nodded back. In that exchange, Ethan understood. Genuine respect needs no words. It is forged in blood, tears, and sacrifice. Along the corridor leading to the main hall, Ethan kept a respectful distance, yet followed Jacob's every step. Each footfall was unhurried, yet bore the weight of history. Late afternoon light through the windows turned dust motes to gold. Ethan watched the lines on Jacob's face, the thick brows, silver hair, the faint scar by his lip, and saw in them a story richer than any case file. Before leaving the courthouse, Ethan glanced back at the now emptied courtroom. No more giggles, no skeptical stares, only the presence of Jacob Holt, a soldier, a citizen, a legend. Ethan realized that today he had learned more than law. He had witnessed courage and silent respect. And in his heart, a flame of admiration was kindled, a guiding light for anyone who listens to history with their heart. The afternoon slid into twilight, the light through the courthouse windows bathing the rows of hard wooden benches in a golden glow. Judge Hayes did not turn his back to the bench as usual. Instead, he stepped across to where Jacob sat. His voice dropped low, yet carried through the hushed chamber. Most of you may not know this, but before I ever donned this robe, I stood in a room steeped in the scent of blood and smoke. The courtroom fell utterly silent, as if the very wooden walls stilled to catch the presiding judge's confession. Hayes spoke of a brutal day in Afghanistan, when his unit lay ambushed in a remote mountain jungle, gunfire cracking relentlessly, shouts punctuating the chaos, smoke swirling so thick that all one heard was the pounding of one's own heart. Cut off from command, the tide seemed lost. Then, through the haze, he saw a silhouette slip between the trees, silent, unseen, until that critical moment. Strong hands hauled his wounded comrades from the kill zone and laid them on safe ground, then returned through the hail of bullets to retrieve the last man down. That savior was Jacob Holt. Gratitude shone in Judge Hayes's eyes as he spoke. The courtroom's hush was born not of legal tension, but of the emotion in his words. The young jurors, scratching notes one moment, looked up, their pens pausing mid-stroke, respect newly kindled in their gazes. Jacob remained still, his weathered face motionless, but the slight furrow at his eye corner betrayed a memory long held. His silence spoke volumes. War allows no performance, and true courage often dwells in the quietest souls. Proceedings resumed, yet the atmosphere had shifted. From Hayes's unexpected testimony, the courtroom ceased to be a cold tribunal and became a space where past and present converged, where a soldier's sacrifice met civilian justice. The rustle of papers, the tap of pens, were now underscored by the heartbeat of reverence. Every utterance passed through the filter of new-found respect. No sneers, no anger, only profound solemnity. When the gavel finally fell, Jacob rose and walked slowly from the courtroom. His steps carried the weight of over 30 years of memory, measured yet unhurried. Outside, Ethan, the ragged hoodie student, waited, eyes fixed on Jacob's retreating figure, his chest beating as if chased by storms of feeling. In his grasp was a hand-carved wooden box, made to hold medals he dared not yet imagine. Jacob passed through the door. Ethan hurried forward, voice trembling yet earnest. "Sergeant Holt, sir, I didn't know who you were when I came up to watch the trial, but after what Judge Hayes shared, I want to learn more about you, and about Caleb." Caleb, Jacob's comrade who gave his life ensuring others' safety, a name whispered like a breath of history, a soul unreclaimed. Jacob halted, eyes fixed on the wooden box. A distant light flickered in his gaze. Then he nodded and quietly opened the door to the small apartment beside the courthouse. Inside was humble simplicity, a worn wooden table and chairs, neatly stacked military volumes, an old bed dressed in crisp white sheets. Ethan set the box on the table as Jacob closed the door and pulled a chair before him. They sat facing one another in the stillness, broken only by the ticking clock. Ethan felt as though he had entered the archive of a hidden hero. Jacob lifted his head, staring through the small window into the fading light. His voice was warm, unhurried. "Caleb was my dearest friend." He smiled through the worst of it. Every week he wrote his sister, sharing the simplest moments: a desert sunset, the scent of camp-brewed coffee, a lone bird's song in the jungle. He never let anyone see his fear. Ethan listened, his heart constricting. He could picture Caleb perched on a rock beneath the stars, bright eyes aglow in the campfire light, his stories warming the hearts of weary men. Jacob opened the wooden box and withdrew a tarnished silver medal, placing it in the dim light so it caught a stray glint against the warm wood. "I gave this to Caleb's sister after." His voice caught, fingers trembling on the medal's edge. Ethan remained silent, letting the pause hold its weight. Jacob bent forward, pressing the medal into Ethan's palm, then straightened and ran a hand through his silver hair. A plaintive guitar tune drifted from an old radio in the corner. An American folk ballad suffused the air with gentle sorrow. Ethan closed his fingers around the cold metal, image of Caleb burning bright, lying in a desert of red dust, sunlight striking his helmet with a final fierce glow. Jacob spoke again. "War isn't just battles. It's people, smiles, stories buried beneath mass graves." Ethan nodded, eyes wide. He realized the story didn't end in the courtroom. It began here, in this shared silence between generations, where the laughter of the departed is remembered and immortal friendship resurrected. Jacob recounted Caleb's last letter to his sister. "Live well, my dear. When I'm gone, let my smile fill your memories." His voice faltered over the words, as though he were receiving that precious counsel once more. Outside the window, dusk painted the walls in strokes of amber. Jacob turned to Ethan, eyes tender yet tinged with sorrow. "Do you understand?" he asked softly. Ethan looked at the medal in his hand, then met Jacob's gaze. "Yes, Sergeant. I will tell this story, of Caleb, of you, and of men like you." Jacob nodded, passing the torch of meaning through a firm handshake. The apartment door opened. Ethan stepped into the corridor, the wooden box held close, resolve shining in his heart. Street lamps cast long beams onto the pavement, etching their silhouettes, Ethan and Jacob, into the dusk. The story belonged to no one person now. It was the community's to carry, each name spoken widening the horizon of hope and gratitude. In the evening breeze, the ordinary legend was etched in memory, and the torch of Caleb's legacy would burn forever in the hearts of those who truly listen. And you, dear viewers of Veteran Best Stories, get ready for the next chapters of these heart-stirring tales. Jacob and Caleb's story is only the beginning, a reminder that true heroes live in silence, yet their stories deserve to be told forever. So, before you unwind, Take a moment to hit like on this video and subscribe to our channel, only if you truly feel the power of these moments. In the comments, share where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. It's wonderful to know who's joining us from every corner of the globe to honor names that never fade. See you in the next story.